Hey everybody, this is Tanner Steed. Today we're going to be talking about this awesome book I just got. It's The Artist Complete Guide to Figure Drawing by Anthony Ryder. Alright, so it's a contemporary perspective on the classical traditional figure drawing. I do live figure drawings every single week, and every time I do those I learn so much. But you know what? Sometimes you need some books and some references to kind of give you a better outlook on a process that really works. And this book is exactly that. It was actually recommended to me by a friend, Denise Dombrakis. She actually went out to Anthony Ryder's workshop and spent 6 weeks there studying with Anthony Ryder and learning the techniques. And she came back with a ton of enthusiasm, and she's like, you have to get this book. So immediately I found it, I got it, and it's here. So when you get a book like this, you could just read through it and, you know, nod your head and enjoy all the pretty pictures, or you could do what I like to do, which is a master copy. Using his process, I am going to be doing a master copy of this beautiful portrait. All right, and I'm going to be doing this master copy in my sketchbook. So I'm going to set up the easel and we'll get started. So as you can see, I've developed a line drawing describing all of the forms, and not really the subtle forms yet, but essentially the basic outline and structure of each of the shadow shapes. And that's really what you need to focus on early on in a drawing, is developing accurate proportions and making sure that the contour is fairly accurate. Now, in order to do so, I've used measurements. This is actually a perfect size to be able to do a sight-size drawing. So it's exactly the same size as the subject within the context of the book. In order to translate that, first you start out with drawing what's called an envelope, and it's essentially just an outline around the entire shape. And I flick my eyes back and forth between the finished drawing and my drawing, and I try to compare angles. And in Anthony Ryder's fashion, he says, compare angles as if you were looking at a compass. Like, is it closer to north-south, or is it a little bit more northwest? And by doing that, you're labeling it with something very familiar to you, and you can be more accurate with the general orientation of your lines. Now, to check yourself for proportions, like if you're not sure whether or not from the bottom of the chin is the same to the top of the mouth, I'll do something very simple. I'll take my pencil, and you can do one of two things. One, you can just hold it out in front of the drawing, but I tend to find myself, if proportional accuracy and getting the exact measurements correct, I will occasionally put my finger down underneath the chin, and then wherever I'm measuring on the drawing, I slide my pencil up and down like this. And let's say I'm doing the bottom of the lip. I'll put my finger here, check the bottom of the lip, and then I'll take this measurement and I'll translate that over here. Bottom of the chin is to the bottom of the lip, and I know that that measurement is accurate. I have a rule for myself. You can do this for every single measurement and make sure it's 100% accurate, but that takes absolutely forever, and it's unnecessary, really, and it's not really drawing. I have like an 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time I am drawing my lines based on just the sight and flicking my eyes back and forth, and then 20% of the time I'm doing these measurements to just check in. So I'll draw a couple lines and then I'll be like, does that look right? Maybe not, but I can't determine with just my eyes and those that general like north-south, east-west angle. It's not the angle, maybe it's the distance between objects. Then I'll put my pencil up there and take a little measurement. And this works if you're doing sight size, if it's exactly the same size. Now, if I were doing a larger drawing or a smaller drawing compared to the original, you would use something called comparative measurement. And that's really what Anthony Ryder teaches out of this, but I just thought it would be a good opportunity to practice the block-in stage, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Once you have the linear structure of the majority of the planes in your outline, it's now time for the first stage, which is called the block-in. And essentially, it is just defining what is light and what is shadow with two simple values. And that's really what the focus of today is going to be. We're not going to go through the entire portrait process. Rather, this is a really strong start for any portrait and even any subject matter at all. Get the proportions, then block in just light and shadow. Time for the demo. All right, so today I'm going to be using the Steed Art lead holder. So it's just not a mechanical pencil, it's a lead holder. So it holds lead, and each lead is a different hardness. In this case, this is a B. They range from, I think, 8H up to 8B. Not sure if that's exactly true. I'm just going to be using two different hardnesses. I'm going to be using a 2H, that'll be the later stage, and just a B. So the B is what I'm starting out with. You'll need a kneaded eraser, which if you haven't discovered these, oh my gosh, you have to get a million. They are incredible. You can pinch them to a fine point. Now that's more of a beginner tip, but I'm sure there are some of you out there that have no idea what this is. It's just an eraser that you can knead and make a tiny, tiny little eraser to pull out pigment. When you're starting a master copy, really you have to decide what is the most important thing that you're trying to get out of the drawing. Because if you just copy it exactly, that's great. It just proves that you can copy a drawing. Really, I am going to be very aware of how I'm cross-hatching in this drawing, because he really does focus on developing form and creating consistent values in a very controlled manner by manipulating his cross-hatching. So we are going to start by blocking in the entire shadow shape, going in a single direction. So I'm using my B lead, and I'm just gonna start to go over this. And I'm gonna apply even pressure on all of these strokes, and they're all going in the same direction. And it's important to go the same direction because then as I develop the drawing, I can rotate it 90 degrees or rotate it 45 degrees and slowly decrease the value and increase the contrast incrementally. Going up here, and it's really important to squint while you're doing this. And now it depends if I plan to do this if this is going to be a long-term drawing, I'm going to have a slightly different approach than if I were whipping this out today in 3 hours. So if I plan for this to be a long-form drawing, I'm going to slowly darken everything rather than blocking in everything at a really rapid pace with light and shadow. So this is sometimes referred to as the cartoon stage, where everything is just two values. And at this time, I'm determining whether something is shadow or if it's halftone. And I can actually go quite rapidly. And really, I find that this is the most exciting phase in the drawing, is just blocking in the light and shadow, because you really feel the form immediately. When you're drawing the linear structure of just the proportions, it's a very slow and steady process, and there's great benefit in having patience during that stage, because now I can just sit back and block in these shadow shapes that I was so careful in making sure they're accurate. I'm gonna go move up into smaller shapes, into the eyes. I'm squinting. Again, I'm applying even pressure. I'm not pushing any harder in any one direction. This whole eye is in shadow. And remember, I know that the iris is darker, but I'm not going to block that in darker yet. Now this is a pretty dark halftone. I'm going to block it in like so. We have a choice. I've blocked in every single shadow shape, and now I have to choose. Do I draw like Anthony Ryder would? This is a master copy, so maybe I should, but I am tempted to take my stump, my paper stump, and to knock all this back. But you know what? I am going to decide now that because this is a master copy and not just one of my drawings, I'm going to only use crosshatching. It's pretty amazing seeing the progression in this book of the development of his crosshatching ability. It's all crosshatching, and look how soft that looks. It's incredible. So crosshatching is the act of making all of your lines in one direction and then coming back in an alternative direction to build up value. So now that everything is the same value, I'm going to now select out the darkest areas. Okay? And so the obvious example is the pupils up here. So I'm going to rotate my hand in a way that I will make a mark in a different direction. And I'll be consistent with that. So I went up and to the right the first time. Now I'm going to go down and to the left this time. And I'm just going to darken everything that I consider one step darker. And immediately we'll be able to see form, and everything will be much more organized. We will only have 3 values after this: the light of the paper, the initial dark, and then my next pass. Seeing in the lips, definitely a darker shape. And drawing and painting is just correcting mistakes, making an educated guess, and then correcting it and refining your decisions. And doing that over and over and over and over again. That's how you make an artwork that is considered finished. Say the hair is all darker. And immediately this is looking so much more like the original drawing. And it's so cool, these examples, the photographs of the drawings are excellent. You can see the hatch marks. And I'll zoom in so you guys can see that. I highly recommend this book. And what's really cool is he will hatch in the core shadow. Rather than drawing a line to divide light and shadow, he will make hatch marks that tapering gradations to create his core shadows. So along all of my form shadows, I'm going to go around and block in these tapering and expanding core shadows, which are essentially a line dividing a wide line that varies in, it fluctuates in how wide it is based on the form. All right, now that I've done that, I am just gonna go to town and keep increasing the complexity. But essentially it's about starting out with just light and shadow, and then identifying areas of further darkness and slowly developing those shadow shapes and keeping them in those families. A light and a dark should never be as light as a dark halftone. So yeah, an area up here should never be as dark as, let's say, an area down in here, because they're within their shadow and light families. This may appear light, but if we compared them side by side, this would be significantly darker than this halftone up here, even though it appears light, because it's in the shadow family. Now as I go around and I darken shapes, I make sure that I don't lose my lines by reinforcing them with a darker outline, if necessary, because it can certainly be subtle. I'm worried about major plane changes and his deliberate hard edges, like this beautiful contour along the right side of her face is all one continuous line. You can learn a lot just by breaking things down linearly. You can describe shadows and form just using the line and the weight of your line. But it's when you combine those two things that makes a drawing impeccable. My favorite artist that shows that technique, a true master, is Nikolai Feshin. I think he has the best drawings, some of the best drawings, one of my absolute favorites. So I'm constantly squinting, and not only am I changing the orientation of the pencil, but I'm not just doing it randomly, rather I'm trying to discover the form that I'm drawing, and the majority of the crosshatches should be similar to or be akin to drawing a contour around the form. So as I'm drawing these, I'm feeling the neck and I'm feeling the sternocleidomastoid coming up and pointing to her ear on the other side. And there's somewhat of a curve to it, but really I taper it just like Anthony Ryder talks about in this book, they're curving, they're tapering, and they're gradating. The crosshatches are. Just going back and forth, I'm squinting and discovering the form and seeing the large relationships. It's really cool. You can go over an entire area, an entire shape in one direction and make one hatch all the way through. And what that does is it's almost like the equivalent of glazing in oil paint. You're painting transparently and you're knocking everything back just one value. This whole region, the whole shadow shape can go into darkness one step further. So you can go over the whole shape in the same direction. And everything has its own contour and its own direction, its own brush stroke, its own pencil stroke. And so when you do these glazes, everything is glazed down one value from the point that they were all in. So it's a harmonious pressing down into darkness. Patience is key for realism. I haven't used the kneaded eraser yet, only because I know that I can push darker. I'm taking my time, trying to feel the form out, and incrementally pushing down my darks further and further. Now you don't want to go too far in a particular area, because then you're going to have to go back over it with your eraser and pull up the value. That, to me, is unnecessary and kind of a waste of time. So Anthony Ryder certainly spent a very, very long time on this portrait. He is not one to be afraid to spend 80, 90 hours on a figure drawing. So, I mean, this portrait may be 50 hours of work. So I, for one, am not afraid to take my time and make sure it looks as nice as possible, as right as possible. So essentially this is the process. You start with your proportions, just that line drawing. You block in your light shape and your shadow shape, or rather you block in the shadow shape, and that reveals the light shape. And then you slowly push down and down and down and down, and eventually you're going to want to start playing around with halftones, and that's really where the rendering comes in. And really, halftones are their own family, right? They have to remain in the light shape, and that's why it's essential to wait to start your halftones until you've made your shadow shapes really, really dark overall. Because the darker you go with your shadows, the more room you have to go in your lights. I like to really hold off on moving into my light shapes until much, much later in the process. Now, before anyone should get into portrait drawing, you need to master the fundamentals of drawing light on form on a simple object like a sphere. So just draw a circle and light it from every single angle conceptually, because without that fundamental understanding, you will have a very, very hard time understanding what light is doing on a subject as complex as a figure or a portrait. And I do spheres all the time. There is nothing beginner about them. I mean, it is beginner, but it's fundamental to everything. So often I'll take spheres and I'll conceptually stack them in three-dimensional space, and I'll try to light them and see where the cast shadows. And I'll make up scenarios where it's a direct light from, let's say, sunlight with a really intense sunlight, so the shadows are super harsh. All of my reflected light, all my cast shadows are darker than my form shadows. That can be really helpful. Just draw random abstract shapes and combine cones and spheres and cubes and then light them just with your mind. If you can do that, you're going to have a heck of a lot easier time drawing and painting from life. When I'm drawing a figure or a portrait, I'm always asking myself, do I have all the parts of form? Do I have the lights? Do I have the halftone? Do I have the core shadow, reflected light, cast shadow, and then the dark accents, or the ambient occlusion? You need all of those components to make something feel real. And if you're missing something, it's going to feel off. All right, so this is the block in. So from here, I'm going to remove my B lead, and I'm going to start working with 2H to try to create a bit more subtle transitions. Now, I could do the entire portrait using this B, but I really like developing the light and shadow pattern really rapidly in the early stage, and then creating the more subtle decisions using my 2H. And generally that's all I tend to use, a 2H and a B. That's plenty for me. That's essentially the block in. We've established the shadow and light shape, and now I'm starting to render form within the shadow shape. So things to remember. One, make sure you have a strong linear structure before you even think about shading, okay? And before you block in, everything needs to be proportional. The angles need to be accurate. Use the compass idea. Is it going north, south, east, west, or somewhere in between? And then once you've established a strong drawing, which it takes kind of a long time, then block in with just a single value, going all in the same direction, and then you can slowly start to darken and become more specific with your values by reorienting, changing the orientation of your hand and cross-hatching in a different direction. Your cross-hatches should describe the form. They shouldn't be random. They should be as if you were drawing, I like to think of it as wrinkles on the form. Where would they be? Pinching and pulling, and that just adds a bit more of a dynamic feel to your drawings. I'm going to continue working on this for another 3,000 hours, and I'm just going to crank this thing out. If you guys want to see the finished product, make sure you follow me on Instagram. I'm probably going to be posting it there. It's just Tanner Steed Art, and make sure to check out my website. I've got new paintings up on there, all for sale. And yeah, thanks for stopping by, and let me know if you have any questions about this process or any of the drawing techniques by Anthony Ryder. This is such a great book. I'll definitely put the link in the bio for a copy of this amazing book. You should definitely have it. All right, thanks. See you next time. Okay, and I'm just going to take it and right about here, I'm going to spritz it all over there. Just like that, and that's going to be able to prevent the